I'll write part one of the story in a separate document, following all your guidelines. I'll keep it engaging. Use simple language with a natural tone. Make it human-centric and avoid any content that might violate YouTube policies. I'll also avoid the specific names you mentioned and create an approximately 1,400-word version. I do story part. Type down text markdown, title, husband, throws cake at black wife for not paying the fine. Part 1. The morning sun filtered through half-drawn blinds as Tanya Williams rushed around her modest two-bedroom apartment. Today was Thomas's birthday, and despite their recent arguments about money, she wanted everything to be perfect. 8 years of marriage had taught her that small gestures often meant more than grand ones, especially during tough times. Keys, phone, lesson plans, Tanya muttered to herself, patting the pockets of her yellow cardigan. Teaching fifth graders had trained her to be organized, but planning a surprise party while keeping up with end-of-year grading was proving challenging. She glanced at the clock, 7:15 a.m. If she hurried, she could stop by the bakery to order Thomas's cake before heading to school. Outside, the spring air carried the scent of blooming magnolias. Their apartment complex wasn't fancy, but the gardens were well maintained, something that had drawn them to this place when they first moved in as newlyweds. Back then, their dreams seemed within easy reach. A house with a yard within 5 years, maybe a baby or two. Life had other plans. Tanya slid into her blue Honda, the same car she'd driven since college. They'd planned to upgrade this year, but Thomas's construction company had cut back his hours, and her teacher's salary barely covered their existing bills. The cake she planned to order, a German chocolate with caramel drizzle, Thomas's favorite, would stretch their budget, but seeing his smile would be worth it. The bakery was only a 10-minute drive, but parking downtown was always a nightmare. Tanya circled the block twice before spotting an open space near the corner. She was so focused on maneuvering into the tight spot that she missed the sign indicating a 2-hour limit. Inside Sweet Dreams Bakery, the warm scent of cinnamon and vanilla wrapped around her like a hug. "Morning, Mrs. Williams." "Early bird today, aren't we?" called out Mrs. Chen from behind the counter. The older woman's hands were dusted with flour as she arranged freshly baked muffins in the display case. "Thomas's birthday is tomorrow," Tanya explained with a smile. "I need something special." 20 minutes later, cake ordered and deposit paid, Tanya hurried back to her car. A small white slip tucked under her windshield wiper made her heart sink. A parking ticket. $75 for parking in a time-restricted zone without displaying the proper permit. She grabbed the ticket and stuffed it into her purse with a sigh. One more thing to worry about. The elementary school was buzzing with activity when she arrived. Fifth graders lined up outside her classroom door, backpacks slung over small shoulders, voices echoing in the hallway. "Ms. Williams, did you grade our science projects yet?" asked Zoe, a bright-eyed girl with braids and boundless curiosity. "Almost done," Tanya promised, unlocking the classroom door. "You'll have them back tomorrow." The day flew by in a blur of math lessons, reading groups, and a minor playground incident involving a dispute over kickball rules. By the time the final bell rang, Tanya had completely forgotten about the parking ticket buried in her purse. That evening, while Thomas worked late, Tanya called their friends to confirm party details. Their apartment wasn't big enough for a proper gathering, so they'd reserved a small room at the community center for Saturday night. Nothing fancy, just close friends, good food, and hopefully enough laughter to temporarily forget their financial worries. "How many people coming now?" asked her best friend Rochelle over the phone. "About 15, Tanya replied, scrolling through her contact list. "Thomas's brother can't make it, the baby has an ear infection. And he still has no idea?" "None. He thinks we're just going out for dinner." After hanging up, Tanya sorted through the mail that had accumulated over the week. Bills, advertisements, a reminder for Thomas's dental appointment next month. The parking ticket surfaced as she emptied her purse, and she set it aside to pay online later. With everything happening, she needed to handle it before it slipped her mind again. But as the week progressed, life kept getting in the way. A student's parent requested an emergency conference. The refrigerator started making strange noises. Thomas came home each day more stressed than before, worried about rumored additional cuts at work. The ticket remained unpaid, tucked inside a cookbook in the kitchen. Friday evening, Thomas collapsed on the couch, remote in hand, flipping through channels without really watching anything. His face looked drawn, deep lines etched around his eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. "Rough day?" Tanya asked, settling beside him. "Johnson's crew got laid off today," he said quietly. "Entire East Side project canceled." Tanya's stomach tightened. "Your crew is safe though, right?" They promised after the last round of cuts. "Nobody's safe, Tan." Thomas rubbed his face. "Rick says they're reviewing all projects next week." She leaned her head against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of sawdust and the soap he'd used since college. "We'll figure it out. We always do." "I know," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I just thought we'd be somewhere else by now, you know? Not still counting pennies every month." Tanya wanted to reassure him, to remind him of all they did have. Each other, good friends, their health. But she knew Thomas well enough to recognize when he needed silence more than words. They sat together, the glow from the television painting blue shadows across their living room, neither speaking their fears aloud. Saturday morning, Tanya woke early. Today had to be perfect. Thomas needed this celebration more than he knew. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him, and made a quick list of last-minute tasks. Pick up the cake, get ice. Buy those paper plates with the corny, over-the-hill jokes that would make Thomas roll his eyes but secretly laugh. She was halfway through her shower when she remembered the parking ticket. It had been over a week. Was there a late fee now? Wrapping herself in a towel, she went to the kitchen and flipped through the cookbook where she'd stored it. The amount due had indeed doubled to $150 with a payment deadline of Monday. "Great," she muttered. Their checking account was already running low, and she'd used more than planned on party supplies. She'd have to transfer money from their small emergency fund, which Thomas monitored closely. She made a mental note to handle it first thing Monday morning. For now, the party was the priority. Thomas remained blissfully unaware as the day progressed, believing Tanya's story about meeting Rochelle for lunch. While he watched a basketball game, she slipped out to run errands and headed to Sweet Dreams Bakery to pick up the cake. Mrs. Chen had outdone herself. 3 layers of chocolate perfection, with "Happy Birthday, Thomas" written in his favorite shade of blue icing. "He's going to love it," Mrs. Chen said, carefully placing the cake in a box. 40 years old? That's a milestone worth celebrating. Tanya smiled, thinking of all they'd weathered together. College graduation, their wedding day in his mother's backyard, the miscarriage 3 years ago that had nearly broken them, the countless small moments in between, Sunday morning coffees, silly arguments about loading the dishwasher, quiet evenings reading side by side. Yes, she agreed, definitely worth celebrating. By 6 o'clock, everything was ready at the community center. Colorful streamers hung from the ceiling, a table of potluck dishes lined one wall, and a small stack of gifts occupied a corner. Their friends arrived in small groups, voices hushed in anticipation. Rochelle had brought her famous mac and cheese. Kevin and Denise brought the good wine they saved for special occasions. "He's on his way," Tanya announced, checking her phone. "Just got his text saying he's leaving the house. Places everyone." Rochelle called out, dimming the lights. Tanya's heart raced with excitement. For a few hours, they could forget about unpaid tickets, potential layoffs, and dreams deferred. Tonight was about celebrating Thomas, the kind-hearted man who still made her laugh even when life got hard. Tonight was about remembering what truly mattered. As footsteps approached outside, everyone grew quiet. Tanya positioned herself near the door, camera ready to capture Thomas's reaction. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together just as they always had. But for now, there was cake to be eaten and candles to be blown out. For now, there was joy to be found in this room full of people who loved them. The doorknob turned. "I've written part 1 of the story following your guidelines. It is approximately 1,400 words. I've used simple, natural language without any complex vocabulary. The story focuses on Tanya and Thomas's relationship and life challenges. I've developed a human-centric narrative that feels authentic and relatable. There's no content that would violate YouTube policies. I avoided the names you mentioned: Marcus, Sarah, Emma, Jamal. I've built tension around the unpaid ticket while developing the characters' relationship. The story ends at a moment of anticipation leading into the next part. Would you like me to make any adjustments to this first part before I continue with the remaining sections? I'll write part 2 of the story following all your guidelines. I'll keep it engaging with simple language, human." The door swung open, and Thomas stood frozen in the doorway. his tired eyes widening as the lights flickered on and 15 voices shouted, "Surprise!" His weathered face transformed, the worry lines smoothing out as a genuine smile spread across his features. "You all did this?" he asked, looking around the decorated community center room in disbelief. His gaze settled on Tanya, who stood with her camera capturing his reaction. "You did this." "Happy birthday," she said, walking over to embrace him. He smelled of aftershave and the mint gum he always chewed on the drive home. 40 looks good on you." Thomas laughed, the sound warming Tanya's heart. It had been weeks since she'd heard that laugh, the one that started deep in his chest and bubbled up naturally, not the forced chuckles he'd been offering lately when she tried to lighten the mood at home. "Man, I thought we were just grabbing dinner," he said, accepting handshakes and hugs from their friends. "I didn't even dress up." "You look perfect," Tanya assured him, linking her arm through his. His work jeans and simple button-down shirt were exactly right for the casual gathering she'd planned. "Come see what everyone brought." The next hour passed in a blur of good food, better conversation, and the kind of easy laughter that only happens among people with shared history. Thomas relaxed visibly, the tension he'd been carrying in his shoulders melting away as he joked with Kevin about their disastrous fishing trip last summer and discussed basketball predictions with Rochelle's husband, Tanya, found herself watching him from across the room, a warm feeling spreading through her chest. This was why she'd gone to all the trouble, to see him like this again, carefree and present, not lost in worries about tomorrow. "You did good," Rochelle said, appearing at her side with 2 plastic cups of punch. "He needed this." "We both did," Tanya admitted, accepting the drink. "It's been a rough few months." Rochelle nodded understandingly. "David mentioned the construction company's having problems. Thomas holding up, okay?" "Trying to." Tanya sipped her punch, the sweet tart flavor reminding her of childhood birthday parties. "You know how he is. Takes everything on his shoulders." "Like someone else I know." Rochelle bumped her shoulder playfully. "You two are more alike than different, always trying to protect each other." Before Tanya could respond, Kevin's booming voice called everyone's attention. "Speech time! Birthday boy, get up here!" Thomas groaned good-naturedly, but made his way to the front of the room. "I'm not much for speeches," he started, rubbing the back of his neck, a nervous habit he'd had since college. "But I want to thank you all for coming tonight, especially with gas prices what they are." Appreciative chuckles rippled through the small crowd. "Seriously, though, having friends like you makes a man feel rich, no matter what the bank account says." His eyes found Tanya's across the room. "And my wife, still surprising me after 8 years. Still the best thing that ever happened to me." Tanya felt her eyes growing misty. Despite their recent struggles, despite the stress and penny pinching and late-night worries, they were still them, still Tanya and Thomas against the world. Now, Thomas concluded with a clap of his hands. "I was promised there'd be cake, and a man turning 40 deserves cake. I'll get it," Tanya called, heading toward the small kitchen area where she'd stored the birthday cake. Her heart fluttered with anticipation. The cake had cost more than they could really afford, but seeing his face when he saw the 3-tier chocolate masterpiece would make it worthwhile. As she carefully removed the cake from its box, the door to the kitchen swung open. Thomas walked in, his phone in hand, his earlier smile replaced by a furrowed brow. "Everything okay?" Tanya asked, arranging 40 blue candles around the cake's perimeter. "Just needed to grab my jacket from the chair," he said, but his voice had that tight quality it got when he was holding something back. "Car keys were in the pocket." "Well, perfect timing," she said brightly. "You can help me carry this out. It's heavier than it looks." Thomas didn't move toward the cake. Instead, he held up his phone, screen facing her. "What's this, Tanya?" Her stomach dropped as she recognized the electronic notice on the screen. The parking ticket, now with its doubled fine amount clearly displayed. "How did you—" "Email notification," he said flatly. "From the city. Apparently it's your second reminder about an outstanding fine. Came right to my phone since we share the email account for bills." Tanya set the cake down carefully, buying time to gather her thoughts. "I got it last week when I was ordering your cake. Downtown parking, you know how it is. I was going to pay it Monday." "Monday," he repeated, sliding the phone back into his pocket. "After it already doubled. After we just talked about watching every dollar. It was just what? Just something you forgot? Just another bill we can't afford?" Just another thing you didn't think I needed to know about? His voice remained low, mindful of the guests in the next room, but the intensity behind his words cut through Tanya like a knife. It wasn't like that, she said, feeling defensive heat rise in her cheeks. I didn't want to worry you with it before your birthday. You've been so stressed about work so you made the decision for both of us again. Thomas ran a hand over his close-cropped hair, a gesture of frustration she knew all too well. We agreed after the credit card thing last year. No more financial secrets, no matter how small. The credit card thing. 3 words that referenced months of tension when Thomas had discovered Tanya had been using a credit card. He didn't know about to cover expenses when they fell short. She'd been trying to shield him from their money problems, but her well-intentioned secrecy had only made things worse when it all came to light. It's a parking ticket, Thomas. Not a secret credit card, she said. Though she knew the principle was the same. I was going to pay it. With what money? The emergency fund? Our rent money? His voice rose slightly. We're barely making ends meet, and you're throwing away $150 on fines that could have been avoided. Tanya felt tears threatening but blinked them back. She wouldn't cry, not here, not with all their friends waiting in the next room. Can we talk about this later? Everyone's waiting for the cake. The cake, Thomas echoed, looking at the elaborate creation on the counter. How much did that cost? The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Tanya hesitated, which was answer enough. More than we agreed to spend on birthdays, Thomas guessed correctly. More money we don't have. It's your 40th birthday, Tanya said softly. I wanted it to be special. Special would be paying our bills on time. Special would be not having to check the account balance before buying groceries. Thomas's voice had that hollow quality that scared Tanya more than his anger. Special would be not having to worry if my job will still exist next month. From the other room, they could hear their friends chatting and laughing, oblivious to the tension building in the kitchen. Someone had turned up the music, an old R&B song from their college days. I'm sorry about the ticket, Tanya said, meaning it. I should have told you. But can we please just enjoy tonight? I'll pay it first thing Monday, I promise. Thomas looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he glanced at the cake with its perfect blue icing and carefully placed candles. 8 years of marriage had taught Tanya to read the subtle shifts in his demeanor, the slight loosening of his jaw, the way his shoulders dropped just a fraction. Fine, he said finally. Tonight's not the night for this conversation. Relief washed over her. Thank you, she whispered, reaching for his hand. Let's go cut your cake. Everyone's waiting. He nodded, his expression still guarded but softer. You light the candles, I'll carry it. As Thomas carefully lifted the heavy cake, Tanya began lighting the candles one by one, each tiny flame a silent wish for better days ahead. By the time she lit the last one, Thomas's face had relaxed slightly, the glow of 40 small fires reflecting in his dark eyes. Ready? She asked. He nodded, and together they pushed through the swinging door back into the main room, where their friends waited with expectant smiles. For now, at least, they would pretend that everything was fine. They would sing and cut cake and open presents, and no one would need to know about the storm brewing just beneath the surface of their celebration. But, as Tanya watched Thomas force a smile while everyone sang happy birthday, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between them, something that even the perfect chocolate cake couldn't fix. I've written part 2 of the story following your guidelines. It's approximately 1,400 words. I've used simple, accessible language with a natural conversational tone. The narrative continues to develop the tension around the unpaid ticket, while showing the complex relationship dynamics. The story focuses on human emotions and realistic reactions. There's nothing that would violate YouTube policies. I avoided using the names you mentioned: Marcus, Sarah, Emma, Jamal. The conflict is building naturally toward the climactic moment referenced in your title. I've included engaging dialogue and emotional moments to keep readers interested. Husband throws cake at black wife for not paying the fine. Part 3. The party continued with a strained undercurrent that only Tanya and Thomas could feel. To everyone else, it looked like a perfectly normal celebration. Cake was eaten, gifts were opened, stories were shared. Thomas smiled at the right moments and thanked everyone for their thoughtfulness. But Tanya noticed how the smile never quite reached his eyes. How his laugh sounded hollow when Kevin told his famous fishing story for the 3rd time that evening. "You okay?" Rochelle whispered when they were alone by the drink table. "You seem off." "Just tired," Tanya lied, refilling her cup with punch she didn't really want. "Been planning this all week." Rochelle didn't look convinced but was kind enough not to press. Well, it turned out great. Everyone's having a good time. Everyone except the birthday boy, Tanya thought, watching Thomas across the room. He was nodding along to something David was saying, but his eyes kept drifting to the door like he was calculating how soon they could leave without seeming rude. By 10 o'clock, the party began winding down naturally. Friends with babysitters helped clean up, taking home leftover food and saying their goodbyes with warm hugs. Kevin and David stayed longest, helping Thomas carry gifts to the car while Tanya and Rochelle packed up the remaining decorations. "Thanks for doing this," Rochelle said, folding a tablecloth. David's been saying Thomas needed a night out with friends. "Work's been rough for everyone in construction lately." Tanya nodded, carefully wrapping the unused paper plates in plastic. Nearly half the cake remained uneaten. Too much food for too few people, another miscalculation in a night full of them. "I thought it would help take his mind off things." "Did it?" Rochelle asked, her tone gentle but direct, the same voice she used in her job as a counselor. Before Tanya could answer, the men returned, conversation dying as they entered the room. The silence felt weighted, uncomfortable in a way it never had been among the four friends who'd known each other since college. "That's the last of it," David announced, clapping his hands together. "Car's all loaded up. Guess we should head out," Kevin added, checking his watch. Babysitter turns into a pumpkin at midnight. More hugs, more thank yous, and then it was just Tanya and Thomas alone in the now empty community center room. The space felt cavernous without their friends' laughter filling it. Deflated balloons hung limply from chairs, and a smear of blue frosting stained the white tablecloth. Small, sad remnants of a celebration that had missed its mark. "I'll get the cake," Tanya said, just to break the silence. Thomas nodded, busying himself with unplugging the portable speaker they'd brought for music. The quiet between them stretched thin and taut as they gathered the last of their things. This silence was different from their usual comfortable quiet. This one buzzed with unspoken words, with tension building like storm clouds. The drive home took 15 minutes that felt like hours. Thomas kept the radio on, an unusual choice for him, filling the car with meaningless pop songs and late-night DJ chatter that prevented any real conversation. Tanya stared out the window at the passing streetlights, each one illuminating her face briefly before plunging her back into darkness. Their apartment felt smaller than usual when they finally arrived home. Thomas carried in the gifts while Tanya balanced the cake box in her purse, the ordinary domestic routine feeling oddly formal, as if they were strangers sharing a space rather than partners of 8 years. "Should I put the cake in the fridge?" Tanya asked, hovering in the kitchen doorway. "Whatever you want," Thomas replied, his voice flat as he set the gift bags on the living room table. "It's your cake." The words stung more than they should have. "It's your birthday cake, Thomas." "A cake we couldn't afford," he corrected, finally turning to look at her directly. In the harsh kitchen light, the lines around his eyes seemed deeper, his expression harder than it had been even during their brief argument at the party. "I wanted to do something nice for you," Tanya said, setting the cake box on the counter. "Is that so wrong?" "Nice would be honesty. Nice would be respecting our financial situation enough to tell me about expenses. All of them." Thomas pulled off his jacket and hung it by the door with deliberate care. "Nice would be not hiding things from me." "I wasn't hiding anything," Tanya protested, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. "I just forgot about the ticket until yesterday, and then I didn't want to ruin your birthday. So instead you let it double and planned to take money from our emergency fund without telling me." Thomas's voice remained calm, which somehow made it worse. Anger she could have met with her own heat, but this cold disappointment left her defenseless. "It was a mistake," she admitted. "I should have paid it right away." "But you didn't." Thomas moved to the living room and sat heavily on their worn couch. "Just like you didn't tell me about the credit card last year until we were $3,000 in debt. And there it was, the real issue lurking beneath the surface. Not a $75 parking ticket or even its doubled fine, but trust. Trust that had been damaged and carefully repaired over months of transparent spending and shared financial decisions, only to crack again over something that should have been minor. "That's not fair," Tanya said, following him into the living room. I've been completely honest about our finances since then. One parking ticket isn't the same as credit card debt. It's the principle, Thomas countered, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. We agreed, no financial secrets, no matter how small. We can't afford secrets, Tanya. Not with my job on the line. I know, she said, sinking into the armchair across from him. I know things are tight. That's exactly why I didn't want to worry you with it right before your birthday. So you made a unilateral decision about our money. Again. Thomas rubbed his temples, a headache clearly forming. Do you have any idea what it feels like? To work 60-hour weeks and still not know if I'll have a job next month? To feel like I'm failing at providing for us? His vulnerability caught her off guard. Thomas rarely spoke so openly about his fears, preferring instead to shoulder burdens silently. The raw honesty in his voice made her throat tighten with emotion. You're not failing, she said softly. We're in this together, are we? Because it feels like you're still trying to handle things on your own instead of trusting me with the truth. The accusation hung in the air between them, sharp-edged and painful because it contained a kernel of truth. Tanya had always been the problem solver, the one who fixed things before anyone else even knew they were broken. It was how she'd been raised, her mother's voice echoing in her memory. Never let them see you sweat, baby girl. Handle your business. I'm trying, she said finally. I'm really trying to be better about that. Not hard enough, apparently. Thomas stood up and walked to the kitchen. Leaving her alone with the pile of birthday gifts neither of them now felt like opening. Tanya heard the refrigerator door open and close, followed by the sound of a beer bottle being uncapped. She closed her eyes briefly, gathering her strength before following him. This conversation wasn't over, not by a long shot. In the kitchen, Thomas leaned against the counter, beer in hand, staring at the cake box as if it personally offended him. I'll pay the fine on Monday, Tanya said, standing in the doorway. From my personal savings, not our emergency fund. That's not the point, and you know it. Then what do you want from me, Thomas? Her patience was wearing thin, exhaustion from the week of planning and the evening's tension finally catching up with her. I said I'm sorry. I admitted I made a mistake. What more can I do? Thomas took a long swallow of his beer before answering. I want you to understand why this matters so much. Why trust matters. I do understand. No, you don't. He set the beer down with more force than necessary. If you understood, you wouldn't keep making the same mistakes. The unfairness of that statement hit Tanya like a physical blow. The same mistakes?
One parking ticket and suddenly I'm the same unreliable person I was a year ago?
After everything I've done to rebuild your trust? If the shoe fits, Thomas muttered, reaching for his beer again. Something snapped inside Tanya. A tether of patience stretched too thin for too long. That's not fair, and you know it. I've been bending over backwards trying to make things work, trying to give you a nice birthday despite everything, and this is the thanks I get? She moved to the counter and flipped open the cake box, revealing the remains of the once beautiful dessert. You know what? You're right. We couldn't afford this cake. We can't afford a lot of things. But I thought, just for one night, we could pretend that everything was okay. That we were okay. Thomas stared at her, his expression hardening. We can't afford to pretend anymore. Tanya, that's what got us into this mess in the first place, pretending things were better than they were until suddenly we were drowning in debt. It was one parking ticket. Her voice rose despite her best efforts to stay calm. It's never just one thing with you, Thomas shouted back, his composure finally breaking. It's a pattern. You hide things, make decisions without me, and expect me to just go along with it. The accusation hung in the air between them, harsh and unforgiving. Tanya felt tears burning behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. That's not true, she whispered. Would you like me to make any adjustments to this second part before moving on to part 3? I'll write part 3 following all your guidelines, continuing the story with engaging content in simple language while maintaining a human-centric narrative that avoids any YouTube policy violations. Typing text markdown title, Thomas didn't respond. Instead, in a moment that would replay in both their minds for days to come, he reached for the open cake box. For a split second, Tanya thought he was going to close it, to end the argument and walk away as he usually did when things got too heated. Instead, in one fluid, unthinking motion, he grabbed the cake and threw it directly at her. I've written part 3 of the story following your guidelines. It's approximately 1,400 words. I've used simple, Everyday language with a natural conversational flow. The narrative builds tension naturally toward the climactic cake-throwing moment. I focused on realistic human emotions and relationship dynamics. There's nothing that would violate YouTube policies. I avoided using the names you mentioned: Marcus, Sarah, Emma, Jamal. The story maintains engagement through escalating conflict and emotional stakes. I've created a natural-feeling narrative that explores the deeper issues in their relationship. Would you like me to make any adjustments to this third part before continuing to part 4? I'll write part 4 following all your guidelines, continuing the story with engaging content and simple language while maintaining a human-centric narrative that avoids any YouTube policy violations. Typebound texty markdown. Title: Husband throws cake at black wife for not paying the fine. Part 4. Time seemed to slow as the cake flew through the air. Tanya barely had time to register what was happening before she felt the impact. Cold frosting against her skin, chunks of chocolate sponge splattering across her face and yellow cardigan. The sound of the empty box hitting the floor seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence that followed. For several heartbeats, neither of them moved. Thomas stood with his hand still outstretched, horror dawning on his face as the reality of what he'd just done sank in. Tanya remained frozen, cake dripping down her cheeks and onto the kitchen tile. "Tanya." Thomas's voice broke, barely above a whisper. "I didn't. I never meant to." She raised one hand slowly, stopping his words. With her other hand, she carefully wiped blue frosting from her eyes. The gesture was deliberate, almost ceremonial in its slowness. When she could see clearly again, she looked directly at Thomas, her gaze steady despite the mess covering her face. "Don't," she said quietly. The single word carried more weight than any shouting could have. Thomas took a step toward her, his face ashen. "Baby, I'm so sorry. I don't know what—" Stop talking." Her voice remained low and controlled, surprising even herself. Inside, she felt a storm of emotions: hurt, anger, disbelief. But on the surface, she maintained a stillness that seemed to fill the entire kitchen. Thomas froze, his outstretched hand falling helplessly to his side. In their 8 years together, he had never raised his voice to her before tonight, let alone his hand. The look of shame on his face would have moved her to compassion on any other day, but now she felt oddly detached, as if watching the scene from outside her body. "This isn't us," she said finally, cake still dripping from her chin onto the floor. "This isn't who we are." "I know," he whispered, his eyes filling with tears. "I don't know what happened. I just lost control," she finished for him. The words hung between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to face. Thomas nodded miserably, unable to meet her eyes. "I'll get a towel," he said, moving toward the linen closet in the hallway. "No," Tanya said, stopping him in his tracks. "I need you to leave." His head snapped up, panic flashing across his features. "Leave? Tanya, no, we need to talk about this. I need to make this right." "Not right now," she said, still in that unnaturally calm voice. "Right now I need space. I need to think. Where am I supposed to go?" The question came out plaintive, almost childlike in its uncertainty. "Kevin's, your brother's, I don't care." She closed her eyes briefly, gathering strength. "But I need you gone when I come out of the shower." For a moment it looked like he might argue. Then his shoulders slumped in defeat. "Okay," he said softly. "If that's what you need." Tanya didn't respond, simply turned and walked with measured steps toward the bathroom, leaving a trail of cake crumbs and frosting in her wake. She closed the bathroom door with a gentle click that somehow felt more final than if she had slammed it. Under the hot spray of the shower, alone for the first time since the incident, Tanya finally let the tears come. They mixed with the water and swirled down the drain along with blue frosting and cake, physical evidence of the evening washing away even as the emotional impact remained. She stood there until the water began to cool, trying to make sense of what had happened. Thomas had thrown a cake at her. Thomas, who had held her through her father's funeral, who had learned to braid her hair when her arm was broken, who brought her tea without asking when she was grading papers, late into the night, had lost control so completely that he'd thrown food at her like they were strangers in some bad reality TV show. But even as the hurt and anger swirled through her, another emotion surfaced: clarity. There had been signs for months now, warnings they'd both ignored. the arguments about money that never quite resolved, the tension that seemed to fill their small apartment like an unwelcome third roommate, the way Thomas had been withdrawing into himself, carrying the weight of their financial struggles alone despite her attempts to share the burden. Tonight hadn't been about a parking ticket or an expensive cake. It had been the final crack in a foundation that had been slowly weakening beneath them. By the time Tanya emerged from the bathroom wrapped in her robe, the apartment was quiet. Thomas had done as she asked. His keys were missing from the hook by the door and his wallet was gone from the side table. In the kitchen, someone had cleaned up the mess. No cake on the floor, no frosting on the cabinets. The only evidence of what had happened was a note on the counter, written in Thomas's neat handwriting. "I'm at Kevin's, I'm so sorry. Please call when you're ready to talk. I love you." Tanya folded the note carefully and placed it in her robe pocket. Then she made herself a cup of tea and sat at their small dining table, mind racing despite her physical exhaustion. What happened now? Was this the end of their marriage? One terrible moment erasing 8 years of mostly good ones? Or was it a wake-up call they both needed, shocking them out of the pattern they'd fallen into, where real communication had been replaced by assumptions and unspoken resentments? She didn't know. But sitting there in their quiet apartment, Tanya realized she didn't want to make that decision tonight, or even alone. Instead of reaching for her phone to call Thomas, as part of her desperately wanted to do, she decided to sit with the discomfort, to really feel the weight of what had happened between them. There were no quick fixes here, no easy forgiveness that would paper over the cracks in their relationship. Whatever came next needed to be deliberate, thoughtful, not an emotional reaction in either direction. The night passed slowly. Tanya moved from the table to the couch, wrapped in a blanket Thomas's mother had given them as a wedding present. She dozed fitfully, waking often to check her phone, which remained silent. No texts from Thomas asking to come home. No missed calls. He was giving her the space she'd asked for, even if it was killing him to do so. By morning, the raw emotion of the previous night had settled into something more manageable, a dull ache rather than a sharp pain. Tanya made coffee and toast, going through the motions of a normal Sunday as if by performing these routine acts, she might find her way back to normalcy. Around 10, her phone finally buzzed with a text from Thomas. "Are you okay? Can we talk today?" She stared at the message for a long time before responding. "I'm okay. Yes, we can talk, but not here. Meet me at the coffee shop on Wilson at noon." His reply came instantly. "I'll be there. Thank you." The coffee shop was neutral ground, public enough that they'd both be on their best behavior, but quiet enough on a Sunday afternoon that they could have a real conversation. Tanya arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a corner table away from the few other customers. She ordered a chai latte and waited, rehearsing what she wanted to say. Thomas walked in at exactly noon, his eyes scanning the shop until they found her. He looked terrible, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he'd slept as poorly as she had. He approached the table cautiously as if afraid she might ask him to leave. "Is it okay if I sit?" he asked, gesturing to the chair across from her. Tanya nodded. "I ordered you coffee. Black, 2 sugars. Thank you." He sat down, hands wrapped around the mug she'd pushed toward him, but made no move to drink it. "Tanya, Wait," she interrupted gently. "Before you say anything else, I need you to listen." "Really listen?" Thomas nodded, his expression solemn. "I'm listening."